Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's live webinar from Fairy God Boss. We're so excited to have everybody here, and we're going to take a few minutes to allow everybody to get connected. And while we do that, if you guys will notice to the right, there's a chat box. And I see some folks have already started to say hello, so please feel comfortable adding where you're calling in from today and where you're joining us from, as we'd like to recognize you. Like I think our first person to jump in there was Brenda from Northern Virginia. Hello out there. We have folks from Long Beach, California, Jeannie, Daniela from Connecticut. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate everybody being here today, and we're looking forward to this great conversation. So let me get started by first introducing myself. I'm Pam Reese. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Accounts for Henry Schein 1. And we have a few short announcements before we get going today. First of all, for those of you who don't know, Fairy God Boss is the largest career community for women. So millions of women tune into Fairy God Boss and visit the site daily. They do this to do connections, seek out jobs, get advice. They also look there for hard to find intel on how do companies treat women in the workplace. And they also host great live events like this one today. So talking about this live event today, one of the things that we wanted to share with you is everyone that's registered, we're going to share this recording with you after we finish today, and that'll come to you via email. The second thing that we'd like to share is that we want to make this really interactive. So we have questions for the panelists, but it's more important, we want to hear from you, right? We want to understand what kind of questions and comments that you have. So please share away, and many of you are doing that. So thank you so many of you that are already popping into the comments there. The other thing is to note that this event is being hosted again by Fairy God Boss. It's being sponsored by Henry Schein, and it's continuing the dialogue of conversation of empowering women in technology. So I'm very honored today to host several of my colleagues here. And let me introduce Lee Benowitz, Sarah Dillon, and Rachel Nelson. And so ladies, what we'd like to do to get started, to help the audience get to know you a little bit, is if you can share with us a little bit about what's going on in your life, personally or professionally, and then what role do you play at Henry Schein today? And Lee, we're going to start with you, please.
Terrific. Thanks, Pam. And hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I'll start off by telling you a little bit about my professional journey. I've been with Henry Schein for a little over 6 years. I'm currently Senior Vice President and Chief Global Digital Transformation Officer for the organization. And in that role, I'm responsible for accelerating the implementation and adoption of digital technologies. Definitely a huge focus at the moment on e-commerce and MarTech. I see Sarah smiling about that. We work very closely together on that. And also for looking for opportunities to leverage digital technology to drive business growth or efficiencies for the business. Prior to my joining Henry Schein, I spent most of my career in financial services. I like to say I grew up in financial services and have spent probably the last 15 years almost exclusively in digital roles. And outside of work, I am a wife and a mom to two 20-something-year-old girls. And all of that keeps me incredibly busy.
I bet. With two 20-year-old girls, I can imagine that life is never dull, right, Lee? So, all right, Sarah, very true. Sarah, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, and thank you for having me as well, and thank you to Fairy God Boss. I'm Sarah Dillon. I've been here much shorter than Lee and even shorter than Rachel still. I've been here about a year. I am the Chief Data Officer at Henry Schein globally, including all of the subsidiaries. I'm responsible for data strategy, data governance, data operations, data analytics, and anything else that touches data. My scope is also very large, and really looking at ways that we can utilize data internally and externally to the organization to drive efficiencies and potentially generate revenue as well. Prior to Henry Schein, similar to Lee, I spent my career growing up in financial services, a little different path. However, I spent nearly 20 years in private equity, where I really built, who I am and learned many of the lessons I know today. And then I spent a number of years at a global data company where I was responsible for private market data and selling that information. Personally, I too am a mom and a wife. I have a 9-year-old, which is a little different. So I am often running around chauffeuring 9-year-old boys around the world or the country. But I enjoy it very much, and I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sarah. And Rachel.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Rachel Nilsson, and I'm the Vice President and General Manager with Henry Schein 1. And I have spent the last 11 years with Henry Schein. Spent most of that time, actually, the first 10 years working in the global academic software segment. So really have a deep understanding of how the universities, dental schools, community colleges are using technology. But then recently took on the challenge of overseeing all of the Canadian commercial business. So that's been new and fun for me, and looking at how we can grow that segment. When I'm not at work, I also am a mother and wife. I have 2 boys, 10 and 12, and recently I have a 3-year-old COVID puppy. So I made mistakes. I feel like I made all of the COVID mistakes. I did all of the things. And so I am chasing a puppy. And some days regretting it, but most days loving it. Thank you.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, welcome, welcome. And thank you guys so much for sharing not only what position you're in today, but how you got there. I'm sure there's probably going to be questions. So as a reminder, for those of you that are just tuning in, to the right of your screen is a comment panel. And we really want to make this interactive. So please, any questions you have, throw them over into the comment panel, and we'll get to them as quick as possible and as many as possible throughout this webinar. So let's move on a little bit deeper. Today we're really continuing that important dialogue around empowering women in technology. So what do you think is the most important, or what are some of the most significant challenges facing women in technology today? And then what can we do to address those? And Sarah, we'll start with you.
Great, thanks, Pam. I think women every day face challenges in many industries, including healthcare, including Henry Schein. And I think it's every role, every position, everything we do in our lives. Could be your mom, being a mom, it could be in work. I don't think it's just technology and technology-facing roles. And I think we need to be able to be trailblazers and think about things differently. Every person brings value and adds value to, has a contribution to how we think about the world. And I think women can do that, and we think differently. And I think that's really important to bring a balance and, a different perspective to the conversation. It's kind of how I feel.
Great. No, thank you. Rachel, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's very similarly. I think there's a really unique opportunity to just expand the way we think about problems, right? When we add a more diverse pool of people around the table, I mean, there's just so much evidence that proves that we get more diverse products, which meet a more diverse customer base. So to me, some of this just feels like really common sense. But it unfortunately isn't so common, because typically we tend to be in a room where it can be a little bit of an echo chamber, because we sit around people that think like us, that act like us, and often look like us. And so I just think there's this really unique opportunity by expanding that. And it's important that it becomes more than buzzwords, and that we're really taking kind of a look around, like, oh, who's involved in these decisions that we're making. But I think that means there's a real opportunity for those that want to lean into it. Because I think we're looking for a more unique and diverse group of people to come sit and participate.
Awesome. Lee, you just mentioned you have 2 20-year-old daughters. So taking that question and maybe turning it around, like, what are the differences in the challenges you faced as you came through your career, and what do you think the challenges are that they're facing now and today in the new environment?
Thanks, Pam, for the question. Neither of my daughters are following in my footsteps, heading down a business track. I have one educator and one budding architect. And so, clearly those are very different industries. I'd say education is highly women dominated. And architecture, while it's improving, I think is still fairly male dominated. So probably more similar to the technology space. But I think that there's so much more awareness now, just echoing some of the things Sarah and Rachel said, right? The diversity of perspective is so critically important in all industries. But I think some of the challenges we face specifically in technology is it is still male dominated. We definitely have challenges like gender bias and lack of representation at the table, limited growth opportunities, pay inequity, right? Not just in our space, but in many. And as women, I think we have a responsibility to educate on why female representation is so important. Again, the diversity of thought and perspective. For our company, there's a growing trend of women in our space. The majority of dental students and new cohorts of dentists are female. We're seeing an increase as well in many of the medical specialties. So it's really important that we have the perspective of who our customers are as well. So I think our responsibility as women leaders in this space is to educate and also model the inclusivity, invite women to the table and mentor others, but really help them to self-advocate for themselves and show that they've earned a seat at the table.
No, that's great insight, Lee. I think as we look at this, as we go into the future, as we're here today and we're looking at the next 10, 20 years, what excites you the most about the future of women in technology? And Rachel, let's start with you.
Great. I mean, like, I don't even know where to begin. It's like the people around the panel today, it's the comments that how many women sign into these websites and that they want to participate. It's the peers I have around the table. It's the mentors I see. It's the leaders that are growing underneath me or within the organization. It's the comments of individual contributors I get from Henry Schein on my teams saying, like, I saw you on that. How do you do that? Like, let's talk more. I think it's all around us, actually. I think it's the buzz of thinking that there's opportunity and potential, and that the face of, women in technology can look different than maybe what we've seen historically. And so a lot of it is, it's just the interactions I see. It's my male counterparts calling out inequality, right? Where I'm not the one speaking up about it. It's them bringing it up. Like, I think there's a lot of things that we're seeing that are really good activity, and it's kind of figuring out how do we leverage those things that are happening organically that we can kind of break down maybe some of the systemic things that we see, or the things where it's just a little bit extra hard. But yeah, it's really a lot of it is just around the people.
Oh, I totally agree. I work for a leader that is a male, and he is so progressive in this area. I'll never forget the first time. It was almost as if I was shocked that he invited me to the table, and it wasn't because of him or anything else. It was my own, I guess, experience in the technology realm. And we are seeing a lot of our male counterparts really stepping up to the table and really helping and supporting us. And I think they value our input as well. Sarah, what do you think about, what do you see as the most exciting part of women in technology for the future?
So I think I echo a lot of what Rachel says. Anything is possible. I kind of feel like technology enables the art of the possible. And when I look at peers or friends or people in industry who I've worked with in the past or current colleagues, you're seeing them do really interesting, dynamic things that are changing the world. And I say that changing the world very specifically because, some of us here at Henry Schein are solving individual problems, business challenges to better our business. But I think other people and peers and women, I can think of women I know who are really working in the AI ML space, creating, really cool models, large language models around how we drive technology. And that's a huge topic today. But I do see much more of that and a willingness for women to drive those outcomes and really think about it differently than I have, in my earlier career.
Great. Lee, anything to add to that?
I knew I was going to forget to unmute at some point. I think actually Sarah and Rachel covered it. it's just exciting to see that there are more and more women who are advancing into leadership roles in technology, leading tech companies. This is a whole new world, certainly than when I was starting my career.
Great, thank you. Hey, just as a reminder to our audience, thank you so much for all the comments so far. We know as we go along, you may have some questions, so please pop those into the panel to the right, and we'll get to those as we go through this session. One of the things that when we look at STEM and we talk about technology, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, I'm in IT. But that's not really true, right? If we look at all the panelists that are on this panel today, there's really not too many of us that are in IT, right? I manage a strategic accounts sales team. Rachel, maybe we could go around and talk about each one of the nuances of how you fit within STEM and what is it exactly that you do today. Because I bet you there's a lot of people, maybe there's some younger women today or younger men that are on this call, and they're looking for, hey, where do I go? What are some of the possibilities in STEM for us today? So Rachel, maybe start with exactly what you do and a little bit more about your role, and then Lee will ask you, and then Sarah will go to you. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, no, so I run one of the software companies, or a segment, I guess, not necessarily a company. Sometimes it feels like a company because I work with a lot of people. But I oversee all the different functional areas, as well as kind of determining for my segmentation, what is the best way to go to market with products and how do we serve those customers best, and what are future strategies around that. My background was in marketing, and then business administration. So I have an entrepreneurial management degree. And so I actually don't have what I would consider a tech background. But early in my career, I was a software trainer, and I loved that. And I think especially because I understood the power of data when it came to our software, and that it could fundamentally change clinical decision support if used properly. And so I really closely tied the concept of how we use software to drive better outcomes of care for patients. And if that's at the heart of what our customers, which is predominantly practitioners, want, like that's a value proposition we have, and how do we leverage that? And I think that kind of got me on the train of like how we use data is really interesting and important. And then if that is true on, the core of like what we do, how does that relate then to how we run businesses and how we make decisions? Which is why I was so excited when Sarah came and joined us, because it's just, as a business, how do we think differently actually about all aspects of our business through the lens of data? But due to my position, I've had the unique opportunity to work with senior leaders like yourself, Pam, but across the business, right? Engineering directors who are female, which is a bit of an anomaly still. Product leaders who are female, leaders, individual contributors. And so I think that I've been able to see representation of women across all of the fields, and seeing that there's opportunity, and knowing when there is visibility of women leadership, how much that impacts our recruitment of females in the employment. The amount of people that I've interviewed for engineering roles because they saw female leaders in the tech space, and they said, I've sought your company out because I saw it represented. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity in there.
No, that's awesome. Totally agree, Rachel. Lee, let's go to you and get your perspective.
So thanks, Pam. So just to pile on to what Rachel just said, and Sarah will probably remember this, but when she was going through the recruitment process, we had a very long discussion about that and women leaders in the organization, and specifically in roles like ours. So that was just resonating with me, Rachel, as you were speaking. And hopefully I played some part in Sarah's decision to join the organization. But my background is actually fairly similar to Rachel's in that I did not initially expect to be in a technology role. And, as I was thinking about this, I don't always consider myself a woman in technology. So I'll talk a little bit about the path because I think it's helpful. So I joined a financial services organization, and I was part of the credit card division, which at the time relied very heavily on direct mail to acquire new card members. And so that was my entry into the organization. It was part of the risk organization, believe it or not, because it was all about how we make sure that we're extending offers of credit to the right people. I followed a risk management track, which was actually more aligned with my academic experience, which was actually economics and finance for my MBA. Very quickly realized that was not for me and migrated more towards marketing roles pretty early on in my career, and had done just about everything within the marketing realm: product development, customer acquisition, customer activation, usage, loyalty, everything related to that in the financial services space. And I realized that I was leveraging digital as a channel to communicate to customers, but I didn't have that practical experience. And so I was very fortunate to be able to move into a role leading a digital team, which was very interesting for a person with limited digital background. But, and I think here's really the important takeaway is, I think you need to be able to understand things conceptually, but a business perspective to all of that is incredibly helpful. And you can surround yourself with technical experts. And so that was my entry into this space, which I've now been in for the last 15 years, maybe more than 15 years. And so when I joined Henry Schein, it was really to help drive a transformation in how we thought about digital marketing, really to grow the overall pie of how we communicate, and really being wherever our customers wanted to engage with us. And more often that was in digital channels. But I owe a lot of my entry into this space to very, very early work doing some coding in a now defunct language. But it really gave me the opportunity to think logically, and I realized I was actually pretty good at it. And so today, again, still not the technical expert, have a fabulous team of really, really smart technical experts. But I can understand things conceptually and provide a business lens that I think sometimes you don't always get. So that's my unique space I think I play. And I really encourage people to think about how to be adjacent with technology and be a woman in technology. I'm very, very involved today in selection of marketing technology, for example. And then, now I'm currently leading a very large scale global e-commerce project. So in it pretty deep, but that happened over time, not right away.
Awesome. Thank you, Lee. And Sarah, we'll get to you. We have some questions from our audience, so we'll get to those right after Sarah, and keep them coming. We're excited to talk with you and have a little bit more interaction. So thank you, guys. We'll be right with you on some of those questions. So Sarah?
So I'm first going to comment on Lee and Rachel's comments about why I joined Henry Schein and why I'm here, because I think that's really important as part of the story. I had options leaving private equity and with my experience of many places I could go. But at the stage of my life and what was important to me, it was finding a place where I could be mom, but also do something that, felt good from an achievement perspective. So I was looking for that perfect fit of what works, what feels good. But as part of that, I really wanted to be in a place, because I came from a very male-dominated industry, where I found people who looked like me, who thought like me in a very different way. And I found that here at Schein, and it was very, very important for me to say, who are the women leaders? How are we thinking about promoting women within the company, and where are we going to get to? Personally, how I ended up in technology, and I like Lee, don't think of myself in technology, but I guess data really kind of falls under that bucket these days. I actually don't work on the technology team. I work very closely with the technology team. I work under the office of the CEO, so with our COO directly. However, like Lee, you spend time very close in this adjacent market where you learn a ton about technology, how it's developed, what it means. And I've picked up a lot of that over time as I've been able to build out capabilities around data and information, and then, parlay that into a deeper understanding about technology. So I would not say I'm the expert, but I would say I'm pretty dangerous when it comes to understanding how it all fits together. And I can dig in and roll my sleeves up as well. But it's very important. You can depend on people who, have a deeper expertise in that area. the last thing I'm going to say is, I didn't imagine myself being here when I started. Some of the path to getting to where you get to, you don't necessarily know where you're going, but you do understand that these are things I enjoy and these are steps or skills that I like to use. And that's what I did throughout my career. And as you get more experience and more exposure and use your network, you start to find opportunities of careers that may make a lot of sense based on what your interests are.
And I might just, if it's okay, piggyback on what Sarah said, because I think there was a question in the audience a little bit around advice, and look for opportunities to grow. I would say I've been at Henry Schein 11 years, and I don't think I've ever done the same job more than 2 or 3 years. But it's always been, there's been something there that I thought, I think I could do something there. And I think it's kind of interesting. And I see an opportunity for me to learn a new skill that maybe I'm not fully confident yet in. And I think that's a really good path, because so often, the jobs don't just appear. It's not like you apply for it. It's something's happened that you've kind of leaned into. And so I guess I want to kind of tie what Sarah said, which has been very true for me. But also I noticed there was a comment around there, what advice would you give? And I think Pam, you asked it earlier. And I would say, be curious, know yourself, but then also look for opportunities to grow.
No, so true. And thanks, Daniela, for that question about, or I'm sorry, it was Kelsey that was asking about, how do you grow your passion, and how do you
So I'm not sure if anyone else is having trouble hearing Pam. Pam, I think your audio might be out.
I started I'm embarrassed to admit my undergrad is in sports management with a minor in pre-med. So I definitely didn't see myself in technology. I took my first class in college, and that class in college was on a language lead that was probably older than most people would ever recognize, and it hooked me. So I started working in technology, and then halfway through my career, I was curious, to Rachel's point, and I wanted to learn more and gain better knowledge and insight as to it seems that people are saying I'm muted. Can everybody hear me?
You're back now, Pam.
Okay, sorry. But it was fun to, I got my master's in health informatics, and that really just opened my eyes again to the world of data and technology and how to connect systems and people. So thank you all so much for your questions. So let's go to one of the questions from our panel, or from our audience here. And this is from Kimbra. Could one of you share what techniques you utilize to increase gender equality in the field of technology? And Rachel, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I feel like it's a little bit unfair. We were talking prior, we had a pre-chat around, what is our company doing to improve gender equality? And I remember thinking, please don't ask me. Please don't ask me. But now you're asking me. So that's a great question. I think, we're on a journey like all organizations. And I feel that, I'm incredibly proud. Our Henry Schein One, as the division of our subsidiary of Henry Schein, we have an interim CEO who's a female, and she is driving a lot of activity and initiatives, and incredibly proud and fortunate to get to work with her. When I look across, a lot of the main hiring positions we've seen more and more females present around the table, not only in being hired, but being interviewed. And so I think I see a lot of movement in terms of it feels like we're at a really good place in terms of representation across all of the major roles. More importantly, though, I think there's starting to become a culture of awareness. And I would say, 5 years ago, we would post a position and only men would apply. And then we'd have a conversation of well, maybe that's just the demographic that's around us. Maybe that's just, the type of candidates we get, and we really need the position and we really need to hire someone. So let's just put an offer out to a really qualified man. And deep down, we kind of knew, well, we don't love it, but we really need the position filled. I'm now hearing proactively before I walk an interview. Does anyone think it's weird? Why don't we have women applying? Can we look at the JD? How should we be approaching this differently? Do we even want to move forward with interviewing 4 candidates if there's no diversity represented? And so I feel like there is a proactiveness to the conversation that then again affects the entire process, no matter what the role is. So it's great to have women in leadership, but it actually makes me significantly happier when I'm seeing it across the board in all roles, and especially when I look at engineering roles, or where you're typically not seeing it. Now that we are seeing it, I think it's because of us changing some of that entry-level awareness for how we're doing our recruitment, our hiring, and it's a much more normal conversation that we're having proactively. So those are just some of the few things that we are doing, or that I have visibility into seeing myself. But I know that there's a lot of work that from like the HR front that they would probably speak to in terms of, some of our diversity and inclusion groups, as well as our women's leadership network, in those areas specifically.
That's a good lead in. And I wanted to turn to Lee. Lee, you are one of our founding members of our Diversity and Inclusion Council. Can you speak a little bit more about what Henry Schein's doing in that front, and also the Women's Leadership Network? If you could touch on that as well, that'd be great.
Sure, Pam. So first I'll start off by saying that we established a corporate diversity and inclusion council about 2 years ago, maybe a bit longer than that. I've lost all perspective of time with COVID, so I apologize. But I think part of it is raising visibility across the entire organization, and one mission is certainly to educate. In combination with that, we actually do have diversity and inclusion goals for many levels within the organization, right? Because we want people to be accountable for it. And if that incentive is a reminder that people should be thinking about it to get the outcomes that we really want as a business, then great, right? So some of the things that Rachel was talking about in terms of making sure we've got diverse slates for open positions, that we're considering diverse candidates for internal movement and opportunities, and even things like making sure that we are giving opportunities to not just women, but underrepresented groups within the organization, opportunities for growth, and even just presentation opportunities. So all of that has been a focus. We have gone a bit deeper into thinking about, how do we potentially change some of the areas or practices as a business? We actually modified some of our mission statement to make sure that we are representing ourselves as the organization we are and want to be. So that's some of the work that's happening there, and not specific to technology, but across the organization. But I will say the creation of a role like mine, it was a new role for the business, which was created about a year ago, and then asking me to take on that role is truly sort of living that commitment as a business.
Great, thanks so much, Lee. Sarah, quick question from Jackie, and this is great. What are some publications, journals, or blogs that you follow?
So throughout my career, it's changed a bit, right? There are a ton of things out there on data that I read daily. Obviously, they're interesting. But, there are things that are, excuse my voice, there are things like Fortune and some of the major publications that talk about a lot of these issues in both technology and other areas. But I think what's important is you figure out the area that in technology that's the most interesting. And I would say Google it and find the 3 or 4 most interesting things. I also say I've learned a ton from just some books, right? Good to Great, and some of the other things that exist in, some of the big books. I love the Steve Jobs book. I love some other books that are old, but they're really good. I often talk about with mentees and other people that networking is a huge part of, what you should focus on as you're growing up in industry in this area. And to do that, there are some books, Meet 100 People, things like that, where I think they're really important, and you can find those things to really, enable your thinking a little differently.
Great. Any other comments from Rachel or Lee on blogs or journals that you guys read?
Just to pile, sorry, Rachel.
No, go.
I was going to say, just to pile on a little bit to what Sarah just said, I'm not wedded to only one source. And I think probably the best strategy is just Google a specific topic. And so for me, and I know Sarah's been involved in this as well, I assume Rachel as well, AI, the explosion of Chat GPT last fall, I think has created a lot of conversation across the business. And so for me, I just look for ways to learn about advancements in the space and how we can leverage and, coming from a variety of sources.
Great. Thank you, guys. Here's a question from Kim. Coming from the clinical dental world, I've always loved the technology side of it, but I have found a lot of resistance given my previous career. What would you recommend to do to have employers see you in a new light? So Kim's had the clinical side of the dental business, and sounds like she wants to move into the technology side. Rachel, you want to start, and then I can add on to that as well.
Speaking about good books, one of the books I really loved was a book called Radical Candor. And it really is just around like speaking what needs to be said in a very timely manner and, coming from a place of being authentic and vocal. So I guess in the situation where you have an employer that you're staying with the employer, but you want them to see you in a new light, I would lean in and probably book a meeting and just say, this is my interest. This is what do you think I need to do to transfer into this area? Because depending on, what the role is, it's unfair to say that that someone is the best candidate just because they're interested. But I think a good employer always wants to engage with their team to understand where are your skills at? Where do you need to grow? We would hate to lose you. How do we help either nurture you in that direction or, at least explain what we need from that role? And so I would, if it was me, probably proactively book the meeting, express an interest, have a willingness to learn new skills that it might take to get there, and then make a decision based on the feedback you get. The nice thing is there's so many technology jobs across the board, right? I think there's lots of opportunities within that space. So if anybody's interested, I think there's tons of stuff there. But I would probably just lean in. And if you're talking to an employer that you've worked with for a while, I would just have an honest conversation. And if it's not that, find someone else within the business that you trust that you can have that conversation with. Because it might not be necessarily your boss or whoever you report to, but maybe it's someone on the peripheral that knows you and you can kind of say, what do you see? Because a lot of times feedback is the number one thing we need.
Great comments there. Rachel, and the name of the book was Radical Candor, right?
Radical Candor by, I think it's Kim Scott.
Great. The other thing I would say, Kim, on that one is in my previous career prior to Henry Schein, I worked for the airlines. And I actually had jumped into a career that I had little experience in, and it was all technology. It was all IT. And so one of the things that I did to help people see my interest and also to get a little experience is on my free time, I would go out on installs and ask tons of questions, the field techs that were doing the installs, and just really try to learn as much as I could to give me some of the background to make sure that was the next step that I wanted to take in my career. So again, being curious and just jumping out there and taking a little bit of a risk. Sarah, one specifically for you. This is from Tracy. She says, I love the commentary on finding a role that was right for you at a certain point in your life. Our priorities do change at various points in life for kids or to elderly parents. For Rachel, just since she has changed positions within HS, did you proactively apply for new positions? Were you tapped on the shoulder, or did you create those career path changes in some other way?
It would a little bit of all of the above, which isn't a helpful answer, so I apologize. I think that I have this really bad habit that has worked to my advantage is when people offer help, I always take them up on it. And I have found that within Henry Schein, we're really fortunate that a lot of executives casually say in passing, that's interesting. Let me know if I can help. And 9 times out of 10, I follow up with them and say, can we book 15 minutes for me to tell you more about what I'm working on? That has led to a lot of organic conversations, mentorship, problem solving. And so then I have found myself in opportunities where they've said, you seem like good at this. Do you enjoy it? We might have another problem. Would you like to look at it? And that has eventually come into like promotions and new roles and new opportunities that I've been tapped on the shoulder with. So I think there's a percentage of luck where, you know, I've been offered things because of happenstance and organically knowing certain people. But I will say that I have proactively leaned into most of the relationships I've ever had with anyone at Henry Schein One. And when they offer to help or they offer to follow up, I always take people up on it.
Great feedback. Sarah, were you going to say something, or?
I was,
yes,
if
please.
You don't mind. So
yes.
A couple things, and I think Rachel hit on some of these, but authenticity matters. And I think why we're unique as women is we're authentic. And, you know, early in my career in financial services, I very much felt like I had to be one of the guys. And in that industry at that time, I did, right? But it matters. And I think following your gut and, you know, being a woman and being, you know, taking advantage of the skill sets you have and the way in which you treat people, you know, if you're a mother, you understand you have those motherly, you know, instincts that you can utilize in business that you may not realize you could utilize in business. I also think what's really important and what was successful for me as I thought through, you know, my stage and age and where I was and what I wanted, you know, in the end, I wanted to be happy. I think COVID was hard for everybody. And I think I had this realization that I can work hard and make a lot of money. I can work hard, be really happy and make a lot of money, or still make money, just maybe not as much. But what's most important to you? And I think that really drove a lot of where I am, how I've gotten here, and why I've made the decisions I've made.
Oh, great comments there. I'm going to jump to one, and I love your stage name here, Punching Llamas. And Lee, I'm going to ask you of this one. How do you respond to male allies who are generally supportive but feel threatened by DEI initiatives and language, including feeling left out? That's a great question.
It is a great question. And I don't think that there's an easy answer here because I think there has obviously been a lot of focus on DEI, and none of it is meant to be exclusionary to white males, right? Let's just call it what it is. It's intended to get us to a point of equity, and so you know I think that the important point is that there needs to be a high level of consciousness and awareness everywhere, right? And we have to just make sure that we are considering qualified candidates, whoever they are, for opportunities whenever they present themselves. So I think for to answer this question specifically, responding to male allies, I think it's important to just be consistent with what's the outcome that we're really trying to achieve here. And it's not to take opportunities away, but make sure that we're thinking about it from a point of equity.
That's great, Lee. Thank you so much. Sarah, I'm going to ask you this one. I think just coming from your background on the data side and your interactions recently with some of our vendors in the technology space. So Brenda says, my LinkedIn feed is full of news of layoffs in my sector, data and technology, and heartbreaking stories of people who have applied for hundreds of jobs but have not landed a role. Is there a danger of women in tech losing ground due to the overwhelming number of people out of work and the limited number of jobs available?
Brenda, you're really making me think about that one. I'm not sure it's women in particular, and I hear what you're saying, but I do think it's a result of where we are economically as well as where we are in industry generally. And I think tech no different than anything else. But I do think if you are, authentic and can put your best foot forward in terms of your qualifications, those will win all day, every day, at least from being a hiring manager. That's how I think about the world. Not sure everybody does, but that's how I think about the world. And I do think it's a good question because we need to think about times like this where we have some, we continue to have work to do. And is the hill becoming steeper or not? But I would say I don't necessarily think so, but I understand your perspective.
And maybe I'm going to jump in on that because I agree with Sarah that I don't think women are more at risk than anybody else in an economic downturn. I would say that due to increased awareness, we're hopefully to some degree equally protected as much as anybody else is. I do think the pandemic had a massive impact on women, not just technology, women in the professional world. When schools shut down and all of a sudden we were forced to make really hard decisions around like, how do I care for my 2 children who can no longer be in school while working full time? And if I'm in a situation where my husband and I both work, we're both executives, we both approach things, we sit down around the table and say, how do we accomplish this? And we're fortunate because we have lots of help. Not everybody has that. So if I'm making half of what my partner is making, and somebody has to stay home because literally we don't have options for our kids, women are more marginalized than men predominantly. And so I think that there's a lot of discussion that came out of the pandemic and came out through remote work and employers looking at flexibility, as things start to shift back to saying, hey, we want people back in the office. Like, how as women do we respond to that? Because there's jobs to be done. And how do we make sure that we can focus on what we need professionally as well as what we need personally? But I think that creates a bit of a more interesting conversation of how are women impacted? Because for me, that was a major blow. I've never felt like I've really had to make decisions around caring for my children and pursuing my job at the same time.
Great. Thank you both. Thank you both. Thank you guys for your questions. Please keep them coming. We have a few more minutes left. I'm going to turn to now a couple of more questions for the panel. And the question is, as you look through your career and the accomplishments that you've had, tell us about a time that you have taken a bold move or a risky move, and what was the implications of that? What was the outcome? And Sarah, let's start with you.
I think there have been phases throughout my career, right? When I was younger, and it was what Rachel said, speak up, be willing to be brave and have that conversation. No one is your best advocate except for you. You can build relationships where you get and create advocates for you, but you're your best advocate. So I think that's one thing that has really taught me well and served me well. I think coming to Henry Schein in a new industry, taking a very large job, likely my job didn't exist here before I got here. And it is, while I'm super, excited about the opportunity, it's a risk, right? Because it's massive amounts of influence and my ability to really change how we think about data internally. So I think a challenge is fun. I like challenges, but I also think it's a risk.
Oh, we are so glad to have you here too, Sarah. So thank you. Thank you for taking that risk. Lee, how about you?
I was trying to think back. I would say I think there are a few situations I can think of where I feel like I took a risk. One was the one that I talked about before, moving into a role leading a digital team, not being the technical expert. That one obviously worked out pretty well for me. But prior to that, I was actually in a situation where I managed myself out of a job. It was the right thing to do for the business. There was a group that was created to really deal with a specific customer segment. And at one point, it just made sense to integrate it into the rest of the business and therefore no longer needed somebody to lead that team. Like I said, it was the right thing to do for the business. And I think I felt comfortable enough with the reputation I had earned within the organization, the connections I had made across the organization, I actually looked at it as an opportunity, similar to what Rachel was saying before, to go do something new. And so, maybe a little bit of how do you turn lemons into lemonade. But I think that when we are faced with those kinds of challenges, we should look at it as opportunities. Can't stress that enough.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Rachel, you talked a little bit about this earlier, about this new challenge that you're facing. So maybe
Yeah.
keep on that theme, maybe.
Yeah, no, I would say mine probably is my current situation. I left, or I've expanded my role, and the role I had previously, I had done for 10 years. I could do it inside and out. I knew every aspect of the business. But I think that almost was a disadvantage because you know it all yourself. And I had a really strong senior leadership team that I had worked with for a really long time. So we were able to execute really, really well. So taking on something new that you have to build from scratch, and you're building a new leadership team, and you don't know it, and you don't have 10 years of ramp up time. You actually have like, hey, we need to see results quarter over quarter, and I don't know the details underneath it. Has been a significant challenge. But I think one of the things that I'm going to make an assumption every one of us, all four of us, have in common, we like challenges. That kind of intrigues us. And so I can't imagine doing a job where it wasn't a challenge.
Absolutely. And our challenges help us grow as well. So it gives us additional knowledge and just a wider footprint in the world of understanding everything around us. So now I'm gonna turn to a tried and true question that Fairy God Boss asks all their panelists. And the reason they ask this is because what they've observed is that women are not good at bragging about themselves or talking about all the amazing things that they do. So I'd like to ask each one of you, please, if you can share with us, what is one thing, either personally or professionally, that you are most proud of and why? And Sarah, we'll start with you.
So I think of a couple of things. One I referenced earlier, which is I'm chief data officer of a Fortune 250 company. That's a big deal. So I'm super excited about that. But quite frankly, I think it was harder and more challenging for me growing up in private equity, which was a male-dominated industry, and making it, right? And I know that sounds strange, but I spent 20 or nearly 20 years there. And you're not going to make it unless you're good. And I hate to say it that way, but unless you're good, you're going to be escorted out the door on day 2. So I'm super proud of that. And that's really been my launch pad to having the optionality I have in my career now.
Awesome. Thank you. And Lee?
So Pam, mine combines both personal and professional. Several years ago, I was one of the recipients of an award from an organization called AWNI, Advertising Women of New York. And they partnered with Working Mother magazine, and every year gave out awards for Working Mother of the Year. And so I'm sure there are many people who are on the call that are working moms that are trying to navigate both a successful career and being a good parent and partner. And so I think there are times when we are struggling with that. I don't think about it as a balance. I truly think about it as integrating those things. And sometimes it gets out of whack. But for me, it was a little bit of validation that I was doing both well. So particularly proud of that.
No, that is absolutely something to be proud of. And it's in the world that we're in today, finding that balance and integrating personal life and professional life can be a challenge. And Rachel, you mentioned it a while ago, and the pandemic really brought that front and center, didn't it? So Rachel, how about you? What are you the most proud of?
Well, I think I'm stealing a little bit from Lee, a different award, but a couple of years ago, I was nominated and recognized for Business of Vancouver 40 Under 40. And what was special about that award was not that, I mean, you have to have letters of recommendation from your employer, from different industry partners, but also actually from your community. And for me, I'm quite passionate about some of the things I do outside of work that are giving back to the community. And so to find something where it says that, like it's not actually your professional achievement, because often, we show that on LinkedIn. But it's the stuff that I was doing in the community, and the fact that they booked those two together, and to recognize an award for that was incredibly flattering and honoring. And so that happened a couple of years ago. And then I probably on a personal level would just say, I'm a believer in, like, you can have it all. And I know you can't literally have it all. But I'm incredibly proud of actually my personal life. I'm very happily married. My husband is still like my biggest fan, and I'm his biggest fan. And I think that being someone who is incredibly career focused, having someone to balance that, that pushes me, encourages me to say yes to all the opportunities. And then also is like, let's just figure out how to make life work. And we love our kids, and they need to be important, and they need to feel valued, but you need to do what you love. And I feel the same for him. And so I'm really incredibly grateful. Just that I think I have a very unconventional marriage potentially, but it works. And so we're 15 years going strong, and I love that about us.
Wow, congratulations. That's incredible. 15 years. Well, ladies, we have about 3.5 more minutes. One more question, if we can get it in here. What advice would you give to your younger self? And Lee, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Pam. Rachel touched on this earlier. Maybe it was Sarah. I certainly did not expect that I would be where I am today, doing what I'm doing. And I mentioned my academic experience was completely different. And I have to say, I always hated that question of, where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? So I think the advice that I would give to my younger self and others starting their careers is be open to the opportunities, right? And seize them when you get them. And I know sometimes you have to be realistic about what you can manage at different points in your life. Sarah mentioned that before. You have to be realistic and know that you can give 100% to whatever it is that you're doing, or at least I feel that way. But don't be afraid to take the leap. And, you will be surprised at the opportunities that present themselves.
Thank you. And Sarah?
I'm going to comment, but before I do, somebody asked you what your brag is, Pam.
Oh boy. My brag is something that goes along with what all Sarah and Lee and Rachel have talked about, is taking a leap. And a few years ago, I wanted to have an opportunity to work internationally, and I just put it out there. I literally just talked to a few people within the organization and said, I'd like to at some point work internationally. 6 months after that, no lie, I was approached about a job, and I had a wonderful experience, 2.5 years in Australia and New Zealand. So, it was a risk. It was going into a new part of the business I had not had any experience in, and it was also a risk of leaving my entire family behind and going with my partner down to Australia and New Zealand. So, but it was so well worth that risk. But thank you for that question.
So back to the other question, I'm going to say I'm a type A overachiever. I think we all are. And I want to get everything done. Just like Rachel, I want to have it all. But I think I've learned over time, you need to depend on, the things that are most important to you. You need to depend on, mentors and other people who can give you advice. You also need to, as I said, build a network and figure out ways that you can, find joy in your job, in your home life, in all of those things. And I'd say, I didn't always think about it that way. I was like, okay, how do I achieve X? And I was very regimented about, this is what I'm going to do next to get there. Life isn't like that. You can't, design it. You can have ideas, but it will change. So, be willing to go with the flow and be willing to take risks when you feel like you can.
Love that. Finding your joy. And Rachel?
Oh, short and sweet. Don't take it personal. Like the things I used to sleep over, I laugh about now. I'm dealing with much bigger problems, and I sleep fine for the most part. Just don't let things slow you down. If you make a mistake, own it. It's okay. still lean in. It's going to be fine.
Awesome. Well, Lee, Sarah, and Rachel, thank you guys so much for this fantastic advice and your insights and just an incredible discussion. Thanks to everybody that tuned in today, and thanks for all your questions, your comments, your reactions. We so enjoyed this time with you today. One thing to remind you, to the right is a type form survey, and we want to get your feedback. How do we do? How can we make this better and improve things in the future? Also, just a reminder, we're going to be emailing out the recording of this webinar to you, and also some more resources about Henry Schein. Don't forget to check out Henry Schein's profile on Fairy God Boss, and make sure you let us know your thoughts, and stay tuned and stay connected. We appreciate everyone today, and we hope you have a great first day of summer and enjoy the rest of the day. Take care, everybody.